I'm Cyrus Taylor. I'm Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at Case Western Reserve University, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to the keynote address by Jonathan Shay, kicking off this inaugural Cleveland Humanities Festival on the theme of remembering war. I can't tell you how thrilled I am personally that we're all here this afternoon. The humanities I think of as the avenue through which scholars contemplate and explore enduring questions of meaning and value facing society. The answers to such questions of meaning and value can't be taken for granted, nor can it be assumed that the putative answers automatically will receive universal support. Hence the need for exploration, dialogue, and discussion. We've worked hard at Case Western Reserve University to support such inquiries, both academically and particularly through the Baker-Nord Center for the Humanities. The Baker-Nord Center, which was established with a generous endowment gift from Eric and Jane Nord, is dedicated to highlighting and celebrating the arts and humanities at CWRU, supporting research and creative work in the arts and humanities, and facilitating cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary collaborations among CWRU faculty and members of other cultural and educational institutions that address these questions and problems of broad human interest in and out of the academy. It's thus particularly important and appropriate today to note that we are blessed to live in a city with an extraordinary collection of institutions that are also dedicated to meditating on and thinking through such challenges that are important to our culture and society. Thus, this first Cleveland Humanities Festival is a partnership of well over a dozen institutions who together will address the theme of remembering war over the course of the next 10 days. It's now my pleasure to introduce Peter Knox, the Eric and Jane Nord Family Professor and Director of the Baker-Nord Center for Humanities. Peter is a classicist, specialist in Ovid, and indeed one of the finest classicists and more generally humanist in the country or indeed anywhere. He's a compelling advocate for the humanities and has played a key role in helping to pull together this year's Cleveland Humanities Festival. So without further ado, my friend and colleague, Peter Knox.
Thank you, Cyrus. Thank you, Dean Taylor. Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon. Welcome, and please take the opportunity before you leave to help us to plan the next event by filling out the comment cards that you will find at your seats and leaving them in a basket at the door when you exit. We'd appreciate that very much, and you would also be able to join our mailing list if you have not done so already. I'd like to welcome you to the Baker-Nord Center's opening event in the Cleveland Humanities Festival. There are a great many people who have contributed to making this program a success, far more than I can acknowledge individually. But I'd like to take a moment to thank the residents of Cuyahoga County for supporting this program through a public grant from Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. Funding from Cuyahoga Arts and Culture is different because it's the residents of Cuyahoga County who voted in 2006 to create this agency to support the arts and humanities in our community with their tax dollars. In addition, the Cleveland Humanities Festival is made possible in part by Ohio Humanities, our state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And we thank them too for their support. I would also like to recognize the 20 partner institutions in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio who are joining us in this conversation about how we remember war, with a rich program of lectures, symposia, films, concerts, poetry readings, and a myriad of other events that could only happen in a very special place like Cleveland. I have often been asked why we would call this event a festival when the subject of war is anything but festive. What we celebrate this year, and will celebrate every year, is not the festival theme, in this case war, but the fact that we live in a city richly endowed with marvelous cultural institutions that enable us to explore from the perspective of the humanities the most important issues of the day, issues that affect us as a nation, as a community, and as individuals. There are no issues more compelling in the life of a people than those surrounding the decision to go to war. It is the special contribution of the humanities to illuminate the legacies of combat and thereby to contextualize them from the perspectives of history and human experience. Before we make the painful choice to send soldiers into conflict, it is incumbent upon us to come to a deeper and broader public understanding of the lessons of war. It is incumbent upon us to remember. And so I want to extend particular thanks this afternoon to our partners at the Louis Stokes VA Medical Center who care for the men and women who served, because this event is for them. Our keynote speaker, Jonathan Shay, has spent his career in service to those men and women too. For many years, he was a staff psychiatrist in the Department of Veterans Affairs in Boston, working with veterans who had endured psychological trauma in combat. He has been a visiting scholar at the U.S. Naval War College and has spoken frequently at the invitation of our military services, as well as at many colleges and universities. In 2007, he was honored with a MacArthur Fellowship. I first encountered him in my other incarnation as a classical scholar. I had been teaching Homer's Iliad in translation to students for about 20 years when the experience was utterly transformed for me after reading Dr. Shay's shattering book, Achilles in Vietnam. I had read the Iliad many times, in Greek and in translation. But until then, I had never fully understood how devastatingly accurate is Homer's portrayal of the trauma suffered by its hero Achilles. He gains his revenge for the death of his friend, but loses himself in the process. War is the undoing of his character. The crucial role of the humanities in contextualizing our experiences is never more evident than in the work of Dr. Shay. He has been a pioneer in the cause of the veterans who have come home from combat, scarred by the same wounds suffered by Achilles and Odysseus in a narrative first told nearly 3 millennia ago. A wound, an injury, not a disorder. Tonight, Dr. Shay will share with us some of his current thinking on this subject and take your questions as he speaks to us on moral injury and war. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Jonathan Shay.
Thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you for your greeting, Dean Taylor. Thank you, Professor Knox. So, as you know, I'm a psychiatrist by trade, and all of my patients for 20 years were Vietnam combat veterans with severe psychological and moral injury. They were very patient, but very demanding teachers. And if I've had anything of real merit to say, it is because of their teaching and getting to know them very well, a great privilege, getting to know them very well over a period of 20 years. Some of them were literally my patient for 20 years. I abominate any form of treatment with heavy ironic quotes that involves the door opening and closing every 15 minutes because it fits the business model. But I didn't come here to rant. I'll probably do some more ranting. The problem with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, well, the problems, plural, as an umbrella term for everything bad that happens in the mind and spirit as a result of going to war, is that, first of all, in this context, the veterans are very clear that it's the result of something that simply happened. that other people did, that sometimes that they did, but in any case, it's something that happened. It's not a disease, illness, malady, sickness, disorder. It doesn't belong in that semantic territory. It's an injury. So several of us have begged, cajoled, ranted at the American Psychiatric Association, please, for the sake of the veterans, of the service members who you proclaim yourselves to be such great friends of, just change this one word. Forget it, never happened. So anyway, so there's a rant. But my other objection to it is the way in practice it has been a kind of Virginia reel dance between mind and brain as embodied in the clinical disciplines of clinical psychology and psychiatry in this culture here in America. I don't know really that anybody else in the world does it better. So when I say in America, it's because what I know. I don't pretend to have a big comparative perspective. But it seems to be deaf, dumb, and blind to the rest of the human critter. What we're doing here at this moment, as is true of every human being that they're conscious, is yes in the brain, for sure, yes in the mind, for sure, but it's also in the social system and in the culture. The PTSD as a narrow syndrome is not a bad description of a very narrow phenomenon that perhaps is legitimately stripped down to mind and brain. It's a syndrome that that you really can demonstrate in lower animals, and it is a good description of what it looks like when other people have been trying to kill you and doing a damn good job of it, but you've survived. And everybody in this room, I expect, has looked at the official diagnostic criteria. I'm not going to march you through this Chinese restaurant menu system, 3 from column A, 2 from column B, and so on. But I want to point out that the pages in this menu do make real sense. And the pages have headings. So PTSD has a page in the menu of intrusive symptoms. And I think a good way to understand what's afoot there, what's the work this is supposed to do, is that it's a kind of hyper-remembering. Don't you ever, ever forget. The brain and the body are saying, don't you ever, ever forget what mortal danger looks like, sounds like, smells like, feels like on the skin. It's that super remembering of what is crucial to living through it. Then numbing and withdrawal cluster, another page heading in the menu, is very common in biology. You can see it in the way the whole metabolism of the body in a life-threatening emergency is tweaked, resource-sparing. So every single thing in an emergency that is not needed for the survival of that emergency is shut down so that the resources are available to survive it, to fight it off, to run away, whatever it is. If you look at the metabolic effect of cortisol, it's exactly that. In an emergency, you're flooded with cortisol. It shuts down everything that, if you're being chased by a lion, everything that isn't essential to not being lunch. So numbing and withdrawal is the same thing in the realm of the mind. All of those activities, commitments, relationships, interests that do not directly serve survival in this life-threatening situation is shut down. Then the third is sort of self-evident. It relates to what I just talked about, except it's the mobilization side. The hyperarousal cluster is mobilization of the mind and body to meet this mortal danger. It's a good description, but it doesn't get the whole way to what wrecks lives and spirits, families, and in the extreme can wreck whole countries. It would appear that the sorry events in the wake of World War I in Germany were important to wrecking that whole country through what I've come to call moral injury. Also, PTSD is really not great at explaining the prevalence of despair among combat veterans. And despair is the engine of suicide. When you are drowning in despair, you readily end your own life. And it is rather poor, it's a stretch to explain why rage and anger, rage being, of course, Homer's theme in the Iliad, the opening line of the Iliad, which in ancient times was probably treated as sort of the title. They didn't call it the Iliad. They would say, "Sing Rage for us, Homer. It's one of your good ones." And it also does not do a good job, PTSD does not do a good job at explaining why some people really go bad. Character deterioration. The Iliad is amazing in the wealth of data that it gives us, that prior to his public humiliation in front of the whole army by the supreme commander Agamemnon, Achilles was a mature, pro-social, revered troop leader. And the generations of high school students have taught the Iliad as the story of an adolescent jerk who couldn't control his emotions and made a big mess. You can sort of see how somebody might make that out of the Iliad if all they really did was sort of read the classics comic version. but the text makes it really clear that he had a rich pro-social character prior to the thunderclap opening of the Iliad. Now, it's maybe kind of fun in a perverse way to play one prestigious ancient Greek off against another. So I'm, to a certain degree, going to be playing Homer off against Plato with regard to misbehavior and character change. Plato is the visible origin. He might not have been actually the originator of the idea, but he's the visible origin for our set of ideas that says that if you make it out of childhood with a good pro-social character, no bad experience as an adult can ever shake that. Your good character is like it's set in stone and nothing can damage it or budge it. Now, that's a beautiful idea. I love it myself. The trouble with it is that it's complete crap. But it has a brilliant genealogy starting with Plato, and that's the most important part of the genealogy, but you can trace it through the Stoics, through Immanuel Kant, to Sigmund Freud, and Freud's not the most important person in the genealogy. Plato, and then after him probably Kant, were the most important people in this genealogy, but it's just not so. Martha Nussbaum, a living and very wonderful American philosopher, has pointed out that the Athenian tragic poets really nailed how wrong this idea is. And I recommend to everyone the last chapter in her great philosophic work called The Fragility of Goodness. But the last chapter in there is an absolute gem of an analysis of Euripides' play, The Hecuba. It's the story of Queen Hecuba, Queen of Troy, who lives through the death of many of her sons, who lives through the death of her husband, King Priam, and the fall of her city, and finding herself a war booty in the hands of the Greeks, along with her surviving daughters. And the thing that wrecks her good character, and Euripides is very clear that she has turned from a noble character into a debased character. Figuratively, she turns into a dog, which was not, come here, cute poochie poochie. In the Greek world, a dog was a useful hunting tool, but a low-status creature. It wasn't good. The thing that turns her from this noble character into a dog is betrayal of what's right by a person that she trusted. Now, I am not going to go further into this great play and legend. Now, it was Homer and my patients that taught me the concept of moral injury. And here's my definition of this resonant term. The reason that I say my definition, because some colleagues have sort of kidnapped the term for a related and important but not identical concept. So my definition, 3 parts, 1, 2, 3. Number 1, betrayal of what's right. That's intentionally stated in common language terms, not abstruse philosophical or neurological or any other jargonish terms. Betrayal of what's right, number 1. By someone who holds legitimate authority, number 2. In a high-stakes situation, number 3. Now, the Iliad is a story of moral injury, where Achilles is morally injured by his commander Agamemnon. And Agamemnon has no more right to the kind of treatment he dishes out to Achilles, which is to publicly, before the army, strip him of his medal of honor, his geros. The text is really clear about this. This is not controversial among scholars. And if I say anything that's wrong, I will trust Professor Knox to correct me, but I'm pretty confident there. That if you to put it in a modern context, if there's an infantry colonel in the American forces who has in his battalion a sergeant who's won the Medal of Honor, and they're in parade wearing their uniforms that have the ribbons for their decorations and so forth, and the colonel is inspecting them, and he comes to this sergeant and he says, "You have a Medal of Honor ribbon and I don't," and pulls it off his tunic and sticks it on his own. People would say, "What's wrong with him? He can't do that. He's a fucking nut." That's what they'd say. And the amazing thing is that the poet in Book 1 of the Iliad actually allows us to hear the grumblings of the troops, because Agamemnon, just boom, boom, has made 2 violations of what's right. First with the priest of Apollo, and then with Achilles. And with the priest of Apollo, when he dishonors this priest of Apollo before all the troops say, "Respect the priest, accept the ransom. Respect the priest, accept the ransom." The poet, this is data in the poem. I'm not making this up. Agamemnon is a disastrous commander. He's a disastrous commander. He may be personally brave, that's not in question, but there's more to being a troop commander than just being a brave fighter. Not that that's unimportant, but it's not the whole story. So, leadership malpractice is central to my definition of moral injury. And that is driven to a degree, an important degree, by my preventive psychiatry agenda for military forces. Because if you want to protect the mind and spirit of the good young kids who raise their right hand and go into harm's way, you must have ethical leadership, people with a real functioning moral compass, so that they don't, out of temporary peak, violate what's right, or corruption of incentives violates what's right. And so it is leadership malpractice is a core component of my definition. The other definition is about something that's real and it's important. And yes, you can detect a little bit of irritation at having my resonant phrase kidnapped, but I'm resigned to it, and the fact is they're doing a lot of good work and pointing out important stuff. Their definition of moral injury is, again, a 1, 2, 3 structure. Betrayal of what's right, same. The moral agency component, who did it, is different. In their version, I did it. The service member did it. And the third component is identical in a high-stakes situation. Now, lamentably, war is always a territory of conflicting incommensurable goods. It's the territory of impossible situations where you're screwed no matter what you do, where your soul is going to be soiled no matter what you do. And that, preventing that is something that would require something that every right-thinking person prays for, and that is an effective end to the human practice of war. But I am not in the position to do that, nor, I believe, is our generation in a position to do that. But it's something we gotta get on with. But given that we do engage in this hideous social practice that we've known for a long time as war, this will happen. As it turns out, I have written about that, but under the rubric used by ethical philosophers, which is their somewhat clunky term, moral luck. And that term really should be heard as moral bad luck. I have never once encountered somebody writing about good moral luck. I'm told that it exists by Nancy Sherman, who should know, but I don't know what it is. But there's a fair amount of writing on bad moral luck. And that's this kind of situation that arises so horribly and frequently in war, where, as I said, you're screwed no matter which way you go. And there are so many service members coming back from these current theaters with this kind of moral injury. The person driving in convoy from Kuwait up into Iraq, and their strict orders are, you don't stop for anything. You keep your interval with the truck in front of you. And so that means that you're roaring along these roads that sometimes go through villages, and a kid darts out in front of your truck, and you feel a thump under the wheels like you've run over a raccoon, and you know you've killed that kid, and you live with that. Or you're a sniper, and this was told to me at a Marine Combat and Occupational Stress and Operational Stress Control Conference, wherever the hell it was. anyway, I can't remember which naval base it was at. That a Marine scout sniper team was called in to support an engaged Marine infantry unit, which had taken several casualties from a very skilled and very well-concealed enemy sniper. And this was during that ugly, ugly fight at Fallujah, or one of them. And the scout sniper identified the enemy sniper in his scope and saw that the enemy sniper was wearing what we would call a snuggly, a baby carrier. And the Marine believed he was doing this as a attempt to use the baby as a human shield, which is a disgusting thing to do ever for any combatant. And the Marine was outraged, but when you consider the culture that the enemy sniper might have inhabited, if he was into the theology of paradise, might have been saying, if I die, my son will face a terrible future, but if he dies with me, he'll go to paradise with me. I mean, I think most of us in this room would find that kind of screwed up thinking, but their culture is sufficiently different that we have to grant that this could have been, in that person's worldview, a humane choice. When you look at both the Iliad and the Odyssey, you see that in the Mediterranean cultures, and this is still largely true today, the life fate of an orphan is terrible. And you can understand why a compassionate father might even think that it was a superior choice for the child to die with him rather than to go forward into lifelong misery as an orphan. But that's all speculative. The point is that the Marine considered it his duty to take the shot, and he did take the shot, and it's the curse of snipers and helicopter door gunners, and I'm told today of drone pilots, that they see the work that their rounds do. It surprises many civilians to learn that many service members who have been in many firefights have never been able to say, I killed that man, because so many infantry engagements are at surprisingly long ranges with many, many rounds going downrange, and knowing whose round hit whom is rarely super clear. But snipers and helicopter door gunners and apparently drone pilots see the work that their rounds do. Okay, so I mentioned, at least I think, may have said it to somebody else today, but forgive me if I repeat myself here. So leadership malpractice is, as I said, central to my version, because it is something we can do about visibly. The incentive structure for officers in the U.S. forces are very badly aligned for protecting the troops and winning fights to the optimum degree possible. And that's a whole other story, and I'm not going to go into how that all works. But when I have been fired up about prevention of moral injury in military service virtually from the beginning of my book projects. And when I was given the opportunity to be the Omar Bradley Chair of Strategic Leadership at the Army War College, there's way less than meets the eye in that grand title. It's a visiting professorship, but it was a chance to, it was a chance, and I took it. Anyhow, but I couldn't continue my clinical practice. But I put it to the veterans in the program, who I knew it would be a blow. I mean, I have as much vanity as the next guy, but objectively it would be a big blow to them to have me leave. And their response to a man was, "Doc, we ain't good for anything anymore, but you go tell them, we don't want other young kids wrecked the way we were wrecked." And that has been the posture that I've encountered in every single psychologically and morally injured veteran that I have gotten to know. And that is that they will do practically anything to protect the good young kids who raise their hands today. And so they sent me with their blessing, and I try to be worthy of it. So let's see what I left out here. Part of what I left out is rant, and that part, I'll give you part of the rant, and that is that the whole human critter is brain, mind, social organism, and cultural inhabitant. The code of what's right, it's a language-like code. You know how young children, when they're just learning language, will learn rules of generalization. So the past tense is you add ed, and getted. They'll generalize from the rule in a correct way that doesn't happen to be correct for that particular verb. Good luck with that, kiddo. But they do that, and so codes of what's praiseworthy and blameworthy in a culture, and you can observe that kind of language-like generalization in the way children sort of try and figure out the moral code of their culture. So what's right is part of the language-like code of what's praiseworthy and blameworthy in the local culture. Legitimate authority is clearly, squarely in the social system. The stakes, poignantly, are often in the love that combatants have for their battle buddies. Achilles and Patroclus were battle buddies. Patroclus was also his foster brother and his second in command, and they fought side by side constantly. And people don't get closer than that in any realm of life. And so when Patroclus goes down, boy, is it a blow to Achilles, the love that he had, and that the body codes moral injury as physical attack. Gets jacked up in just the same way. So there you have the whole human critter, brain, mind, social system, and culture. And I know that I can't have all of this in my back pocket done. I have it all. Here it is on a platter. But I have the sense that it's at least a rich enough account that it could be true. Anything that's less than the whole human critter has got to be deficient and has got to limit our ability to get things right. So, I haven't been paying attention to time. Where are we? Close, okay. So I talked about bad moral luck, and I explained the second flavor of moral injury, and some of the names attached to that are Shira McGuinn, Brett Litz, Bill Nash. I know all of them. They're all serious and dedicated people, and I'll leave it at that. So, the downer message is that if a person's experience is bad enough in bad ways, his or her good character can be wrecked. And I've already twisted your arm to read at least the last chapter of The Fragility of Goodness by Martha Nussbaum. And on that total downer of a point, I am finished and would like to hear your comments, questions, ideas, and arguments.
Can I just borrow this? I'd like to invite you to come up to the microphone up here. If you have comments, questions, observations, just so that we can all hear them. That mic is live, and if need be, I could bring it to anyone in the audience.
Somebody over on this side could use this one. So, would you?
Yeah. Here we go.
Oh, okay. Well, he'll come up, and by the time he
Dr. Shay, thank you for your comments. A couple of questions. First, your thesis does have great appeal. Do you have evidence that it works? And secondly, if it does work, what kind of training would you recommend for the military?
Okay. I'm not sure I know what the "it" in this question is, but evidence that my prescription for the military is three things: cohesion, leadership, and training. Cohesion has to do with the stability and positive character of links between people who fight side by side. Leadership spells out as expert, ethical, and properly supported leadership, and training spells out as prolonged, cumulative, and highly realistic training for what people are actually asked to do. And these three components, which can be thought of as orthogonal axes in a three-dimensional space, are all known areas of concern in professional military organizations. And it is very clear that these are sub-optimized in the American forces. To put it as charitably as I can. We are not doing the best that we can do. Now, this is an easy sell to people who in the military are actually tasked with fighting, because they readily say, and I've had this feedback from audiences of military officers over decades. They say, well, Doc, we want those things too, because these cohesion, leadership, and training are combat strength multipliers. And coming from Boston, you know that I hear click and clack the Tappet brothers. And although one of them has died recently, but anyway, that gives me that great opportunity for the theatrical automechanic shrug. Yeah? So why are we doing such a lousy job of it? And that's sort of the come to Jesus moment in that talk with that audience of military officers. And there is usually from the back row, someone says, well, Doc, it's the personnel system. And to a civilian officer, a civilian audience, this almost always sounds like it must be a bullshit cop-out. It's not. It is, in fact, the biggest bang for our buck in getting our forces right would be visible reforms of the military personnel system, because that is the structure of incentives that lead to so much mischief, so much misbehavior. I have said to multiple audiences, military audiences, the worst misbehavior comes not from sexual lust, not from financial this is an open secret that the structure of incentives in our military forces leads to very suboptimal outcomes. So I could rant for hours on the subject of reform, and I try not to rant.
I just wanted to recommend a book. Your talk resonates with me, particularly in my novel club. We're doing a unit on World War I, as a lot of people are this year because of the timing. And this book called Ghost Road by Pat Barker.
Oh, yes.
It's the third part of a trilogy, which is amazing. But the main character, one of the main characters, is in a psychiatric hospital outside in London, and the people come back from the front.
In Scotland,
in Scotland,
Craig
right.
Lockhart, yes.
And then the one patient who went berserk and ended up bayoneting one of the prisoners of war that he was supposed to be bringing back to camp because he was just so tired and exhausted. It was just one more burden on his exhausted body to do this. And then then he goes to the hospital and he has to deal with, he sees the specter of this man who keeps reappearing. And then he gets this incredible smell that he can't get rid of, and he's just consumed by this, like he's smelling his guilt. And it's just part that. And then Sebastian Fath's Birdsong is another book that we did dealing with life in the trenches. And and I love your references to Ulysses. It's been 50 years since I read it, but I'm dying to reread it on that. I think I missed the main point. But anyway, I think it's those are two, and you obviously want to reference fiction to reality. I think those are both worth considering, particularly The Ghost Road.
The Pat Barker novels are masterpieces, and people who are interested in this should definitely read those novels. I regard fictions as experiments with the moral and social materials of the culture that they inhabit. And the fiction writers deserve every bit as much honor as the chemists and the physicists. They are experimentalists, and we learn important things from them.
Thank you for a very insightful talk. Could you describe a bit more? You use the term mind and brain separately, and I know you've also done research in that area. And could you explicate a bit more about that in relationship to what you're talking about with your patients?
Well, you waited to the last phrase for the hook there, with my patients. With my patients, I'm no longer in active clinical practice, but it was a dialogue and a process of step-by-step. When it came to medication, step-by-step, and it has to put it honestly, experimentation. Because at the time that I was doing this, there was such a crude pharmacopoeia available for combat trauma. Basically, you could sedate people, which I find deeply objectionable as a chronic thing. Sometimes it can be life-saving for the veteran or for others, but except in that extreme case, you want to have a veteran who is in this kind of distress to be able to use all of his or her capacities. I say or her for completeness. I was in Boston where the Women's Division of the National Center for PTSD vacuumed up every single woman with PTSD or combat trauma in the Boston area, and no woman ever presented herself at our program. So I have no on-the-ground experience with female veterans. Zero, none. But for male veterans, one of the earliest papers I published was on the class of medicines known as the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, of which fluoxetine or Prozac was the first one available and the one that I had the most experience with. And I'm still quite proud of that paper because it was simply based on listening to the veterans report on what they thought this medicine was good for. And I thought what they were telling me it was good for is very valuable, which is that it enhanced their authority, their personal autonomous authority over their own anger, that they could feel anger and yet be able to restrain the urge to go for the person's throat in the face of anger. And that was enormously valuable. And the veterans willingly, knowingly accepted quite burdensome side effects, which the clinicians in the room will know what they are. Many people know what they are, and they are burdensome, because they wanted authority over their own anger. Nietzsche famously said, "Who is strong? A person of strong passions who is master of those passions." Of course, there, as so often with Nietzsche, he's quoting the Roman Stoics, but forget that. But it's true that these veterans, when they experienced that they had no authority over their anger, inevitably ended up feeling humiliated. chronic humiliation is often confused by mental health people as depression, although I can understand why someone would call it depression. But if you can prevent the humiliation by enhancing a person's authority over their own behavior when aroused to anger, you do them an enormous favor. They will tell you you're doing me an enormous favor. And the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, they reported, did that. And I believe to this day, there is still a very wide use of this class of medicines with combat veterans. And I'm convinced that their acceptance of it is through the apparent antidepressant, in ironic quotes, relief of chronic humiliation by restoring their authority over their own anger, which sounds awfully complicated, and maybe it is complicated, but for the veterans, it's a very clear benefit, very clear benefit. And so I'm proud of that piece of work. Yes?
So your concept of the moral injury, you made it very clear that for you it's extremely important. The second point, namely that there is a person in authority that is giving the order of the moral digression that is happening. But the question that I'm asking myself is, though, what are then the moral implications of this, in not now focused on the individual, but in a moral, ethical framework? Can this not serve also as an excuse for behavior that is then committed by the soldier? I mean, we have examples in World War II very clearly where after the atrocities were committed, the excuse was always, I was just following orders. So does that not excuse some of the responsibility, the individual responsibility of the act that is committed?
I'm somewhat getting tangled up in what you're saying. If I understand what you've just said, does the idea of moral injury, as I have put it, excuse the leader who has issued the, or does it excuse the, well, I put it to you, in a deeply power-laden institution like a modern military force, is there any exculpatory dimension at all to saying, look, I knew this order was fucked up, but the captain said we had to kill somebody and plant this gun on them. And what was I going to do? It's very brave of civilians to say, well, I would declare that to be an illegal order. Okay. Are you ready to point a finger at a veteran who is suicidal because of what he did by following an illegal order and saying, well, you deserve what you get in the way of suffering or misery or suicidality or your own death? My moral world doesn't accommodate that kind of response to such a veteran, if I've understood what you've said correctly. it would be wonderful if the theoretical norms of an obligation to resist an illegal order were matched in practice by an institutional readiness to embrace soldiers refusing orders that they judged to be illegal. I don't think that at least American forces are there. The best forces in the world take this seriously, and I think sometimes have been almost okay in living by it. But the American forces sure aren't there. And when we're dealing with the wreckage, I'm not going to point fingers at the veteran. Yeah.
We have time for one more question before I invite you all to step out and join us in a reception where we can carry on this conversation more informally.
Thank you. I'm Scott. I was in 21 years as an enlisted guy, and as you've probably talked to, you've obviously talked, I don't know if any of these other people have, but every enlisted person knows what the difference between leadership and warfighters and politicians, and everybody knows who their go-to guy is if they have an issue. All the enlisted guys do, and I'm sure it goes up. Also, along to agree with what you said earlier about the system being broken. Vast majority of the special operations, anyway, officers make it to major and then they bail. The ones who are back doing the desk jobs and doing the political side of it, they're getting promoted, and the other guys are getting just pissed off and leaving. So that's part of the dichotomy to explain to these people, maybe a little bit that you didn't explain. Also, have you know a gentleman named Andy Morgan? He's a researcher at
Andy
Yale.
Morgan at Yale, yeah.
Yeah.
I've known him for years and years and years.
All right, I'll talk to you afterwards then. That's it. I just wanted to say I agree completely. The system's broken, and you said about the guys that really care about the guys, the officers that you talk to that really care about the guys. It's not all officers, and to go with what this lady was saying, it's a two-way street. There's good orders, there's bad orders. If you're given an order to do something, you don't know. I don't know what my team leader knows. He may tell me to do something that seems wrong to me, but I don't know what he knows, so I do it. And you know, there are not guidelines, but there are, like you said, you get in the band, you get in the unit, and things just happen, and you don't know what everybody else knows. So you can't judge somebody by what they actually did because they didn't know. They may have not known the reason for the order. Thank you.
Yeah, there are so many situations where, at least after the fact, if someone can fill in what was known, it's often an incredible gift to the veteran who's suffering. I had a patient who had been in a Army communications unit that set up relay towers on hilltops in Vietnam, and in this particular person's experience, they had set up on a hilltop controlled by Marines. And at some point, the Marines were pulled out, but whoever was responsible for this Army relay unit sort of forgot to the message didn't get through that the Marines protecting them were being pulled out. And as the helicopter was lifting off with the last of the Marines, one of the Marine sergeants kicked a case of grenades to civilians, fragmentation grenades, in its full title, to this soldier. And he interpreted it as the Marine saying, "Here, you're going to get hit tonight, and this is for you to kill yourself so that you're not captured. And he was deeply bitter and confused and depressed by this memory that just kept churning. And it's one of the beauties of the way we did the work that we did, which was mainly in groups. Because I was there in the group room when a Marine veteran said to this Army veteran, "No, I think you have that wrong." If his message was, "Here's a frag for you to off yourself," he would have given you one. But he kicked out a case for you, because in night fighting, being able to have a good supply of frags to throw, the enemy doesn't know where they're coming from, can't tell whether it's mortar fire or what. It's a brilliant protective move. This Marine sergeant was saying, "Here, I want you to live through the night." And just getting that from his brother veteran in the program was like that for this Army veteran. And if it had been me, I would have been stone ignorant of that crucial fact. And that is one of the key groups. That's one of the healing happens from moral injury only in community. I've seen it done. And it's the community of other veterans that is the primary engine of recovery. People like me with all the alphabet salad after their name, we're stagehands. We're not the main act. We get the curtain up, we sweep out the gum wrappers, we count the chairs. That's it. The heavy lifting is done by veterans, for veterans, with veterans. And we do a couple useful things around the edges, and that's it. So, are we done? We're done. Okay.
We might thank our speaker.
Thank you.